You know him by his deep baritone delivery and a name tailor-made for a broadcaster, Vance. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this special Proffitt Report podcast with a true WHAS legend. I'm Doug Proffitt. Vance walked into WHAS TV and radio in 1957. The TV station had only been on the air for a few years. He's now 84 years old, and I dare you to tell me he sounds any different. He rose from being a DJ to creating one of the country's first ever sports talk shows on radio for WHAS. Back in those days, the broadcasters in this building took care of both TV and radio and occasionally wrote articles for the Courier-Journal. In his long career here, he covered UK, U of L, and the Kentucky Colonels in the ABA. He was at one time the voice of both the Colonels and U of L. When I started here as a high school intern in 1978, Van was still going strong and a blessing for a young intern to watch. He ad-libbed most everything. He knew his stuff. And that's why I also asked him to be my announcer to introduce all of these podcasts.
This is Vance. You're listening to the Proffitt Report podcast with Doug Proffitt.
You are such a fabric of this whole company and its call letters. Do you remember the first thing you said when you announced?
That's a difficult one to remember. I was very nervous. I remember that because I grew up listening to WHAS radio from Park City, 100 miles below here in the Cave area. And I was pretty nervous in the early days when I came here. I was the youngest announcer. They had 9 men on the announcer staff, and they told me, they said, we've never hired an announcer who did not have at least 5 years experience in the business. Well, I had started in 52 at Glasgow, then worked in Bowling Green, then Lexington, and came here.
Who hired you here?
There were 3 men principally involved. Paul Clark was the chief announcer, one of the 9, which included Milton Metz, Ray Shelton, Bill Britton, Tom Cactus Brooks. They were part of Jim Walton. They were part of the announce staff. And I auditioned for Paul Clark, a longtime announcer, Sam Gifford, who was the program director and later the station manager, and of course married to Phyllis Knight. And also George Walsh, who was the program director of WHAS Radio. Walsh had been the voice of the Philadelphia Phillies. He came here from Philadelphia after being the play-by-play announcer of that famous National League team.
Well, let's set the stage. Okay, in 1957, Channel 11 had already been on the air for years. The Crusade for Children had been created. It was underway, but you all were located, the offices, the studios, at the top floor of the Courier-Journal in a very cramped space. And May 10th, we celebrated the 50th anniversary of moving into 6 in Chestnut, the broadcast facility, the state-of-the-art building. Do you remember that day?
Yes, I do. I remember we came here as a brand new place because at the old building, the offices were on the 5th floor. Radio was principally on the 6th, and television's main studio was on the 7th. And as you said, a crowded situation. So much so that a lot of times they would move down and use a radio studio on the 6th floor. But when we moved here, television had these big new studios. We had better cameras. The only thing, Doug, back then, we had a chief engineer who did not believe in teleprompters. So when I had to do commercials, did a lot of them live, like pouring beer on camera and things like that, you had to take a marker, a big black marker, and write your commercial out on a big sheet of paper under the lens of the camera. I mean, with a teleprompter, it's about 90% easier. So we came here and...
Well, I'm going to bring since you brought up teleprompter, I have to bring this story about what I witnessed, something you did. As you know, I started here in high school. I came in 1978 as a high school kid. And as an intern, you work holidays and you work weekends. And I was here during the weekends, and you were anchoring the Saturday sports on television. I'm sure at the same time doing your broadcast radio responsibilities. And I used to like to slide into the studio to watch the 6 o'clock news. I'd hang off in the sort of the dark shadows and watch you guys. I'd watch every move. And I always had seen in the previous newscasts by the anchors that everything was on the prompter. In front of them, everything was buttoned up. And then I watched you come in the studio one day for the 6 o'clock sports. Last minute, you're coming in there in a commercial break. All you had was these scrap sheets of paper and a notepad. And then you sat down, said hello everyone, I'm Vance, and you started doing the sports. And you were looking over at the monitor, watching which video was up, talking about it as a broadcaster would, looking down at your notes for just a few facts, and then you continued to the conversation. It was a conversation. That's an important point. So we had a sharp executive producer here at the time named Jeffrey Marks, and I tracked down Jeff the following week. I said, well, what is this? I've never seen this. I said, all these other anchors come in and they got their scripts. They're reading off the prompter. Van just sat down, flawlessly did the sports. He said, Doug, that's what a broadcaster does. They know the material. They sit down and they bring you a conversation. We are not the New York Times. Van shouldn't be out there reading the newspaper. He should be doing exactly what you saw him do. Yeah. But that's rare.
Well, I was known as an ad-libber, and sometimes it did get me in trouble because I went a little long or repeated or was not quite as erudite as maybe I should have been. But in those early days of TV, we couldn't wear white shirts. I'm wearing a white shirt for this interview with you today. But one of the rules, if you wore a white shirt, and it was black and white TV, it did something. It glowed on, I don't know exactly. No, don't wear a white shirt. You had to wear a blue or pastel shirt. And now I guess you can wear whatever shirt.
Yes.
Okay.
You can even wear a green shirt again these days.
Well, later we did arrive at that point. I was still doing television.
So in 57, I know you as the sports broadcaster, the voice of sports talk. You did U of L games, but mostly the Kentucky Colonels. You were the voice of the Colonels, the ABA team. Did you start your career here in 57 doing that, or when did it morph into a sports broadcaster?
Well, George Walsh hired me. They had an announcer's job open and a sports casting job. And he called me and he said, I'm going to hire you as my announcer. Kaywood is in the sports department. George had been sports director, but now he's program director when he hired me. And he said, I have a man who's been broadcasting the Minneapolis Lakers. They were the world champions, the NBA. George Mikan played. He said, I'm going to have to hire him. He has more experience in sports than you. I was only 19 years old. And he said, but I'm going to use you to back up when we have the state tournament and all of the sports coverage we have. So that's how I started here, doing both. And I did weather on TV. Eventually, I wound up doing the High Varieties, which was an hour-long Dick Clark-type show on Saturdays with live music and live young singing talent. And one thing we did then, Doug, every week on High Varieties on Channel 11, leading up to the Crusade for about 6 weeks, we'd have the Crusade King and Queen contest. We'd have a boy and a girl win every week. And then on the final Saturday before the Crusade, the week before, we'd have the winner. And then they would bring them out on Saturday night of the Crusade and crown them out at Memorial Auditorium.
So at what point, describe a normal week for me of your live broadcasting at your busiest. Did you ever do your UK games too?
I only broadcast, when I was in Lexington in radio, I did quite a bit of UK. I worked under Claude Sullivan. He was the Wildcat broadcaster on the Standard Oil Network. But when I came here, Kaywood had to do a University of Florida Kentucky football game once. And he said, Van, I was a Kentucky Colonel broadcaster. This would have been in the 70s. And he said, I'm going to be in Florida Friday night or Saturday doing the football game, and you're going to have to do the UK basketball game, a preseason game against the Russians. So this must have been around 76. That was the Russian team where they had all the controversy, and Russia won the gold on that controversy at the end. And he said, now you're going to have a color man. So I went to Memorial Coliseum, and I told him, I said, here's the man I want. This was a young broadcaster in Lexington, and I said, I want him to be my color man. And I called him up, and his name was Tom Hammond.
Oh, my gosh, that's my wife's half-brother.
You're kidding.
No.
Well, he eclipsed anything I ever did in sports, becoming an NBC man.
You and Tom Hammond broadcast together.
Yeah, we did on that game.
Oh, that game.
So the guy on Jerry Roberts, I think, he was on the Nationwide Mutual Network. He did the game of the week on radio. And I did work a game with him, and I had another game. We were going to do Kentucky, and I got trapped in New Orleans during that 78
blizzard.
Storm. Yeah, the blizzard. So I called Jerry, and I said, I can't make it for the game, but I have a great broadcaster I want to recommend, Tom Hammond. And he called him, and Tom did the game, and Jerry called me back the following week profusely thanking me. He said, that guy was great.
How often did you two work together, you and Tom Hammond?
That was only that one game, but I knew Tom well, and I knew he was a good.
The reason why I ask if you did UK games is because the broadcasters here at WHAS had divvied up the teams. Who was the Cardinal broadcaster, U of L broadcaster at the time?
U of L was broadcast by Ed Calais, and then Jack Tennant came here under Dave Hart as assistant athletic director and became the play-by-play announcer.
So Ed Calais at WAVE had the U of L games.
Right.
And then eventually they switched under the umbrella of all WHAS radio.
Right. Here's an unusual thing I did not know. About 3 years, 3 years ago, he was put into the Kentucky Sports Hall of Fame. And his daughter, Kaylin, who used to be on High Varieties here on Channel 11 with me, she got up and said, my dad, one of his greatest thrills was broadcasting the Kentucky Colonels. But that old Vance came along and took his job. She said, then my dad was the voice of the University of Louisville, and here comes that old Vance.
Oh, no.
I never realized that. I kept bumping because our station would get the contracts taken away from WAVE 970 at the time. I kept taking Ed's play-by-play job.
Now, did you all get along at the time, or was the competition really, really big and fierce among WHAS and WAVE?
The competition was bigger in television than it was in radio. There's a lot of competition, even in the ownership, the Ballard Morton, the Mortons and the family, and the Binghams over here, the elitism of the East End. But later on, when I was full-time sports, Bob Dominy and Fred Cowgill had come in. The competition to scoop or to get stories or to beat the other side was really keen. Very keen competition. And I'm pretty proud of a lot of the stories that I broke as a sportscaster, because sports reporters didn't break many stories. They weren't known to do that.
You were afraid to make your sources mad.
Yeah, and the old newspaper guys had that pretty well sewed up. They were pretty embedded with the teams and the people who'd been here a long time. But I broke a lot of stories.
You did. I remember being in here. You all have your sports office, and you'd come flying out with a scoop. I want to ask you about Louisville and the current talk about the NBA. As you know, Dan Issel has been put in charge of landing an NBA team, which costs, the retail value on the NBA team is $1 billion with a B dollars, and he has to raise that money. Is this town ready for an NBA team?
That's a difficult question for me to answer.
But you're the perfect person to answer it.
I lean toward no, but basketball is so popular in Kentucky and Louisville. If you could do like they did with the Colonels and the Pacers did in the ABA, Dan Issel, Mike Pratt, I started doing the Colonels when they came on with the team. That had a Kentucky, Louisville, Darrell Carey, Western, Bobby Resco, Wayne Chapman. Indiana had George McGinnis. They had Don Boosie, who'd played at Evansville. But the way the NBA draft rules, you'd have to do a lot of finagling.
Well, why is the time not right? Louisville's changed since you were broadcasting in the 70s and 80s. It's a much younger town. Demographic for the NBA.
Yeah, it's unbelievable how this city has grown. Okay, I'm not saying it couldn't happen now that the eminence of Patino and Druich, that eminence is gone. I think they had a lot to do with stall it up to now. So we're looking at a different situation than even a year ago, let's say.
So your thoughts, would an NBA franchise work here in Louisville?
Again, it has to do with how good a ownership, how well they took care of bringing these top name players that are known and good management. You're mentioning $1 billion. We could have kept the Colonels. We'd have had a team in the NBA for about $3 million plus.
Oh, my.
In 1976. J. Bruce Miller was trying to get big backers to pitch in $3 to $4 million. A few years later, I'm doing sports when the Minnesota Timberwolves $250 million.
Well, what happened
and now
back
you're
then?
talking about $1 billion, right?
What happened back then, Van? Why wasn't there an interest in keeping the ABA in here in town? Because I remember even going to the games to watch the Kentucky Colonels. It was a fantastic atmosphere and usually sold out.
You had about 4 to 5 fantastic franchises in the ABA. And Kentucky and Indiana were two of the best. San Antonio was great, even though they were newer in the league. That team had moved from Dallas, where it was drawing nothing. You had several situations. The ownership of the ABA teams were divided on what kind of deal to work out with the NBA. John Y. Brown had his ideas. He didn't think that the ABA teams should have to give up the TV revenues, pay reparation, or buy their way into the NBA. But the New York Nets, maybe Indiana, I'm not sure which teams, but they said, no, we want to get in. We want to get in. So they divided on what they were going to do, and all of a sudden 4 teams said, we're going. In the meantime, Kentucky was left out of the situation.
And it dissolved.
And things were going on then. John Y. and his wife Ellie were getting a divorce.
And she was a part owner of the team.
Yeah, they owned the team at that time.
Let's go back to what it was like to work in this building when you all moved in. You had such amazing names. There's you. There's Kay Woodlift. There's Wayne Perky, Milton Metz, Phyllis Knight. Just some of the names in the news. Fred Wishy. Was there competition among yourselves? I sense that between Milton and Phyllis, there was some competition over the years for guests.
I'm not aware of that. Milton was pretty busy. He had his own thing going. He had the first talk show. Milton went to the United Nations one summer, and he was in New York for about 3 months on some type of a fellowship or observing the United Nations. And when he came back, he went and sold him on the idea of Juniper 52385. That was the name of the program, and that was a telephone number. He had heard a talk show in New York, and he came back, and it was a hit. So he had that for 2 or 3 hours every night. He did the weather on TV.
He did
6
that
and 11.
from 9 to midnight.
Yeah.
And for like 30 years. So
sure did.
That was the first of its kind in the country at night?
No, in Louisville.
Oh, okay.
In Louisville, the first, and I had the first sports talk show years later.
Now you created sports talk.
Which lasted for 33 years. And I consider it one of the worst decisions in the history of broadcasting in Louisville when it was taken off the air.
And they agree. When Tony Vanetti was on the air the very last night, announcing its demise, he was giving his own employer hell about it. He said, this is the worst decision ever made. We got to move on. But So you created sports talk from 7 to 9 p.m.
Started at 6, and after about a year, we went to 7 to 9. But I never saw this rivalry you're talking about between Phyllis and Milton that much, or any of the people we had here. They were pretty professional. If it was, I was unaware of it.
Who was the best news anchor you ever worked with? You were in the sports chair. Who was the best news anchor you ever witnessed at a certain moment along the way?
Well, there were a lot of good ones, so I was kind of a young, more impressionistic young man at 19 and 20 when I came here. WHAS Channel 11 had the 5 o'clock news on radio. They had a 10 o'clock news. They were 15 minutes long at night. And the guy who did the 5 o'clock news was Pete French. And he would go to television and do the 6 o'clock news. And then at night, he would do the 30-minute. It was at 10 back then. The night news was at 10. The evening news was at 6. Pete French was the most awesome because he had the whole market. Nobody else was doing news like local news. The rest of them were rip and read newscasts on Wave, and there wasn't any other station besides Wave. And they had a guy as a very professional broadcaster, but he would take AP copy and read it with his head down and look at the camera every once in a while. Pete French had writers. He wrote, and when he went to the studio on the 7th floor, it was a happening. There was copy flying behind him and about 3 people running along behind him, bringing his film and stuff like that. Nobody else was doing this. He left here to go to Cleveland, I think, Cleveland, Ohio. Big contract. Within a year or so, he was out.
We were always a WHAS family at my house, but I also remember watching Livingston Gilbert at Wave a lot. He was a big presence in this town for a while, wasn't he?
Certainly a very professional broadcaster, not a lot of personality. He's just a good and a very sharp man, very smart. He read for the Library of Congress, which I did too, but he read at the American Printing House of the Blind, and he was excellent for that. He was about their favorite reader out there because he was, not real exciting and all that, but he was smooth and he's steady.
Today, when I come in, my day is I not only have my TV responsibilities, but I have social media, Twitter, Facebook, these podcasts. Back in the day with you all were feeding radio, TV, maybe doing something for the Courier on occasion. Tell me, describe one of your days when you would also have to broadcast a game. What would it be like, a typical day for Vance?
Well, of course, I did play-by-play on TV and radio, but most of my play-by-play was on radio down through the years because you didn't do every game on TV. But a lot of times I would come in the afternoon and I would do sports on radio, and I would then head out about 5:30 or 6 o'clock to Freedom Hall to do a Colonel's game or to do U of L. And then a lot of times I would come back in at night and do sports on the 11 o'clock news or later at night and leave overnight reports on the game. Sometimes Win Elliott of CBS, he would call me once or twice a week, and I'd give him a play-by-play clip to use on CBS the next morning. And in television, Kaywood and I, if they had a regular sports anchor, Kaywood and I would do features. He was doing UK and I was doing the Colonels at one time. And we would go in and sit in with the sports anchor and do our stories of what we had just broadcast on the road or bring it up to date, how UK was doing.
Let's talk about Kaywood Ledford for a little bit, because he holds such a fascination in people's minds even to this day, because he went out on top. He didn't stay too long. I'll tell you a funny story about that. The last year he did the Derby broadcast for us, after he retired from UK radio, he stayed with us on TV every Derby. And then he decided, I want to call it quits. So my job, they assigned me, you follow Kaywood's every moment with the camera. Do a TV story on Kaywood's last moment. So we're out at Churchill Downs at the paddock where our broadcast compound was, and this was the time ABC Sports had the Derby.
Yeah.
I walk in to go
Rune
find
Arledge and Chris Schenkel. They came down here about 3 or 4 years. They had the worldwide that became such a big hit.
Wide World of Sports.
Yeah, and ABC really went heavy on sports because they had so much success. I'm in the infield covering the Derby over by the presentation stand, and Arledge and Schenkel walk up and I interview them live on WHAS, on TV and radio. And they said, this is a great event, and ABC wants this event. Within a year or two, they had it. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
So I'm going to look for Kaywood, and he's in our trailer. But it's what I see when I walk in that I'll never forget. I walk in and there's Kaywood sitting next to Jim McKay, who was also getting ready to retire. And they're laughing like good old friends, telling war stories about the Derby, talking about their favorite horse. And I thought, to me, at my age, these are two legendary broadcasters. McKay especially put the Derby on the map. So I said, Kaywood, where are you going next? I need to follow you. My photographer's ready to go. I'm going to go up to the rooftop, Doug, where I have always broadcast, in between the spires. And he had a black coffee, and a cigarette. And he said, and I'm getting ready to go now. So I said, well, okay, the paddock is packed full of people. No problem. I got a back way I can go. But we go right through the middle of the paddock. It's like the parting of the Red Sea. He's been off the air from UK broadcasts for maybe a full year, maybe 2. Ralph Acker had taken the job. People are pulling on Kaywood, saying, would you come back? You left too early. Please, we miss you. Da-da-da-da-da. So I go up to the top, and camera's rolling. I said, what'd you think about that, Kaywood? He said, well, it's flattering. But he said, the biggest mistake that people in our business, Doug, make, and he pointed at me, is we stay too long, and we don't know when to leave. He said, I made my decision to leave because my vision had changed a little bit, and I had made a few mistakes that only I could catch, but I saw where the trend was going, and so I retired from UK basketball at that moment. So what was he like to work with? Milton told me that he was one of his favorite human beings of all time to be around.
Yeah, Kaywood was hired from Lexington. I worked in Lexington same time. I was on radio, but he did both radio and TV in Lexington, WLEX. And the radio TV, I think, had different call letters. So he came here in 56, a year before I did, when George Walsh moved up as program director. Kaywood came, and he wasn't named sports director for a couple of 3 years after that. And then I was hired and came here, but did not go full-time to sports. But he and I worked together, and then when I went to work for Kaywood, he and Ed Shadburn called me in, and it was like a new career. They gave me a whole new salary structure and everything. And then I got 100 basketball games a year with a talent fee on every one.
Oh, my.
I made a quantum leap in my career right there.
Wow.
And that was the greatest thing that ever happened to me. Kaywood was wonderful to work for. And of all the people I've ever been around and worked for with, he had a two-way loyalty. He represented you to management, and if he thought they were wrong in a decision they were making concerning you, he would go with you. He told me one time, he said, if you're unhappy with this, I'll go upstairs to the front office, and we'll both threaten to quit or turn this over. And, Of course, we never got to that. But Kaywood...
Did you learn from him?
Quite a bit. He loved to write. Kaywood did, and later on we'll talk a little about that. Maybe one of the questions I see here you're going to ask me. But I thought his race calling, and he took a lot of pride in his writing and his race calling.
Oh, the work at Churchill Downs and the racetrack.
And the Northern Dancer Derby is I think the highlight of his career. And then he had his own style and identification on UK. He wasn't always technically or the greatest play-by-play announcer, but he was Kaywood, it was UK, and he had the mannerisms and the familiarity that was number one, like Wade Hoyt, Cincinnati, Johnny Most, Boston Celtics, Kaywood, Kentucky Wildcats.
He was always so well-dressed, too.
Yeah, well, he was spectacular about that. And Kaywood, when you worked for him, he used to give us silver stuff for presents for Christmas. It was expensive stuff, and it had your name engraved. He spent a lot of money on that.
The image of the old newsrooms were that every other desk had a bottle of bourbon in it, and everybody was. I do know that people were smoking cigarettes, and because when I was an intern here, they were still smoking. Was the old WHAS newsroom pretty wild like that? Did everybody have maybe a little bottle of bourbon around where at the right moment you could take a little nip?
No, I didn't see that. I didn't see that too much. No, Doug. There might have been. We had one personality that worked here, had a show in the afternoon, later went to Cincinnati. They accused him. He used to disappear, and they said he was up smoking something on top of the WHAS building. And he had a little guy who was a cameraman. They used to gather up there on top of the building, and they weren't lucky strikes. That's what I heard.
When you decided to retire, how long had you been here by then?
Almost 40, about 40 years. I told them that I was going to go around one more time with U of L, and then they called me in and they said, well, what if you could work part-time, come in the afternoon with Terry on the sports in the afternoon. So I continued to work here until 99. I worked about 2 or 3 years until retirement age, and then I retired.
Your voice is the most distinctive thing about you, but if I've always wanted to ask you, what do you think your strengths were as a broadcaster? If I had to, you said Kaywood was a writer.
Well, he was a great broadcaster too, but yes. I'm telling you things that you maybe don't. He loved those books he wrote, or he loved to write things, but he was an excellent broadcaster, and he liked that too. But I could tell he took a lot of pride in his writing, and of course, those books were hopefully going to make him a little extra money. As I worked in radio, I was known as being versatile because I came here. I'd done so many different things on the way up as a youngster, backing up Claude Sullivan backing up people here, doing the weather, doing different things. Vans, varieties. I think we had a show named that one time. So I think my versatility and then my ad-lib ability that developed. When you do play-by-play, you don't have a script, basically. You're winging it. You're describing things. And through the years, I developed, like I said, sometimes a little too much ad-lib ability.
Did you ever try horse racing?
Yeah, I called a couple of 3 races. Or I practiced and did racing sometimes when Kaywood was gone. But when I was doing the Colonels, I would broadcast through practically the Derby, although I worked the Derbies, but there was one I missed, the Secretariat, because we were playing a playoff game in the afternoon in Indianapolis, and Dan Issel and I sat in a restaurant in Indianapolis and listened to Kaywood call the Secretariat win. So I called races, but because I was tied down doing the play-by-play, they had an opening in there, and Paul wanted to do races. He was our third sportscaster. He'd come in as an intern from UK and then join the department.
Paul Rogers, you're talking about, and he was sort of a protege of Kaywood Leather.
Yeah, so then he started doing the races and gained his little niche there doing.
Well, I've always been curious. What's the key to calling a horse race? I'm always fascinated by it. How do you keep your thoughts straight? How do you keep your language up with the race and be accurate?
Well, you have to have quick memory and then forget it as soon as they're ready and learn the next one.
Oh, my gosh.
And you have to look at certain little peculiarities, whether they have something around their nose, what the color is, how big a horse is, what's its color. Now, if you only got 7 or 8 horses, it's pretty easy. Well, it's not easy, but it's because if it's an 8 furlong, 6 furlong, if it's a mile, you learn how you make your call. You call all the way back. When they hit the half-mile pole, you go back to the front. So you've got your little procedure on all of that. You have to fill in the name of the horses and who they are. So what you do is you look for those characteristics. But I always have been overwhelmed and admired being able to call 20 horses. I don't know how Kaywood did those races, and even Paul later on, where they have 20 horses running out there, because that's a lot to remember, and with a little mud and change of the race position and everything, it's easy to make a mistake, which a lot of national broadcasters did who came in here.
You once told me that back broadcasting in this building in the early days, everybody moved in here in 1968 of May. So from May, that date on, this was sort of like a broadcast center, that it wouldn't be uncommon to have Cassius Clay or Muhammad Ali just show up. I mean, did that happen all the time with big figures? And which ones do you remember?
Well, of course, I remember Ali coming in and others too. Late in my career, you were here by then. You remember the night that Tom Lasorda came in and took over the lobby, and Vincenzo brought his chef. And
yes, that's right. Vincenzo was here.
Yeah, it was unbelievable. We had a 5-star restaurant right in the lobby of Channel 11 here. And Lasorda is another one like Ali. He has so much ambience or so much tradition about him, and he's outgoing. He's a friendly guy. But Ali came in here a lot. And he always had things to say and was a center of attraction when he came in.
Now, on the personal side, you have always loved to walk. You have always loved dogs. And your favorite breed is what?
The Irish setter. I call them the old-fashioned, the bird dog type, the field trial Irish setter. I had one, Aaron, that his mother was from Dublin, Ireland, and his father was from DeKalb, Illinois. He was a Midwesterner. And I've had 3 Irish setters in all. Now I don't have a dog, but they were great dogs.
And your choice of exercise is that you walk. I remember when you lived in Riverwood, in Louisville, right there along River Road. I'd drive down into work on River Road, and because you came in the afternoon, I'd see you walk in Cox Park and getting some exercise.
That's what I did. Every morning I walked my dog back and forth to Cox's Park. Later, I walked in the afternoon when I had time. And I have figured unofficially walking dogs since 89, I've walked around 16,800 miles. The circumference of the earth is 26,000. So,
how did you figure that out?
Well, 2 miles or more a day. And for so many years, when you start going from 89 to now, that's a lot of years and a lot of miles. So I'm coming around Siberia now, and I'm headed back toward Kentucky and Indiana.
Now, back to the broadcasting history of this station. For many years, through the 50s and 60s, it was a horse race in the ratings between WAVE and WHAS. WAVE was dominant at one point, and then in the 70s, this place lit on fire. It just became a juggernaut, both radio and television, and shot to the top of the ratings. Record highs. The station was actually known around the country as one of the highest rated CBS stations in America. What was that like at that time to suddenly see it dawning on you all that you had all these new listeners, all these new people? I bet you couldn't go anywhere in town.
Well, here's the situation. We kept losing the ratings because our anchors had been hired away, Mort Krim and people like that, and Livingston, and then they had Melissa Forsyth over at WAVE, and they were doing a good job. They were beating us in the ratings. And then when Bob Morris came here and started bringing Mort Krim and later brought Jim in.
Jim Mitchell.
Yeah, Jim Mitchell. But here's a little funny for you. They brought a news director in named Vin Burke. He was part of we call it the Philadelphia Mafia, because Morse brought all these Philadelphia people with him, producers, George and Steinberg and all of them. But they put Jackie Hayes had been hired, a young Jackie Hayes, and she came here and they put her on the noon news. And then you had Wayne Perky was doing the sports. They had Fred Wishy come in every day at noon. And we were losing all the ratings, 6, 11, even the noon. Vin Burke talked me into coming in and sitting on the set and just doing 1 or 2 sports stories a day. And we began to gather it up. So I come to work one day, and the guys are bouncing up and down. The news producers, they said, "Hey, we just beat everybody on the 12 noon news. That's the first one. Vin wants to see you." So Vin's patting us all on the back. Congratulations. Well, within the next few months, we'd pretty well taken the market over on the ratings.
So the
noon news was the first one.
Because I remember Fred Wishy was anchoring the noon news, but the anchor team that I remember was in place when they went number one, if I'm correct, was Jim Mitchell, Kirstie Wild,
right,
Chuck Taylor doing the weather, Dave Conrad in sports, and then you guys were doing the responsibilities that you just mentioned. Was that? Yep. That was probably, about 77, something like that? 76,
77, about that era, that time. And that was when WHS finally achieved the point of getting back into number one.
Ken Rowland told me he was on the air in 74. Of course, that marathon coverage of the tornado, which he was rightfully awarded for, many awards. It was just sort of a matter-of-fact delivery, very calming, reassuring. And he told me that things really changed. He could tell by the public's mind because of the station's commitment, both TV and radio, with Dick Gilbert flying and chasing the tornado in his helicopter right after that horrible event.
Yeah, the tornado was quite an event because I was supposed to do a basketball game at Freedom Hall. The Colonels and Carolina Cougars were going to play a playoff game. And I can remember Mac Calvin, one of the Carolina players, they were in the executive inn out there saying, "That's an unusual experience to look over to Freedom Hall, see the place you're supposed to play a basketball game tonight, flying through the air toward the interstate highway."
Were you all inside the building when it got hit by the tornado?
Right.
You were inside Freedom Hall?
I was here, and there was a weatherman at Standiford Field. They would call up, and they called him, and he said, "I'm here in my office, and I see a storm, a tornado coming across the runways here. I've got to get off the phone." And he hung up. Then they went to Dick Gilbert, who had circled around behind it, and he's broadcasting live on radio, TV. And I looked over at my sports cohort, and I said, "Don't you think Dick is blowing this up a little too much?" I didn't realize it was as bad as that time as it was.
He was the early warning because there was no Doppler radar.
That's right.
The radars back then were like black and white scopes.
Yep.
Now, Dick Gilbert was an old, was he a Vietnam War fighter pilot, helicopter
either
pilot?
That or Korea. Korea? One of those Asian wars. Yeah, he had a lot of experience flying, and he not only flew that plane, he did the broadcasting himself. Most helicopter reports, one guy flies the plane and the other talks, especially current times and days. But Dick did it all. I think he had done BBM in Chicago before he came here, WBBM.
He saved so many lives.
Sure did. And he swung in behind it and followed it all the way across the city, all the way up to the Brownsboro Road area where it hit, and Northfield up in there. And you could drive along Brownsboro Road there. I lived right off Rudy Lane. I went down to my house. The lights were still on. The phones still worked. But at Brownsboro Road and Rudy Lane on the other side, everything was blown away.
Wow. If you had to name a favorite era in the broadcasting that you had here from 57 on, which time period would you narrow it down to? There had to be a window there where you thought, man, it doesn't get better than this.
Well, I would have to go back to the 70s, the Derby coverage on both radio and TV, and then calling the 75 championship when the Colonels won the ABA against the Indiana Pacers. And during that interim in 78, I did some U of L on TV, not a lot. We only did 7 games a year, and even did a little U of L on FM. They were on 970 wave, but Ed Shadburn, who had come over here, had been able to get a few games on radio, and when I was not doing the Colonels, I would do a game on the WHAS FM, which is now WAMZ.
We love looking at the old Derby coverage, and because we've recorded it, and it's still here stored in the building, and there you are in the broadcasts from the early 70s, you, and even in the middle 70s, there's Coyote Calhoun's part of the coverage, then we throw it to Vance, and I think you were almost wearing a white suit at one point.
Yeah, probably
the 70s.
Yeah.
You were interviewing people in that one broadcast.
I worked a lot of places at the Derby. I worked on the roof, setting up the race, and then Kaywood would call it, and the race of the day on Saturdays, every Saturday during the meet. I worked down on the presentation stand. I worked in the paddock area, and I finally went to the backside because you could have your own world back there, and you're with the horses, you're with the horse people. If you wanted to eat, you could go up to the track kitchen, and, that was my world. That became my own situation.
We still get emails and notes from viewers saying, would you all please do your all-day Derby coverage again like you used to? And I try to tell people what an unusual circumstance it was for this TV station back then, because we were a CBS station. ABC Sports had the Derby, but said to WHAS, will you carry it for us because our affiliate is so weak in Louisville and your coverage and your broadcasters are so good, and we were doing all day long anyway. So we were a CBS station carrying ABC Sports coverage. Very unusual, and that lasted for decades.
Well, you realize WHAS Radio did the Kentucky Derby before the national networks ever came in. They used to do the Derby, so when they came here, CBS TV, to do it on radio and TV, they pretty much studied WHAS and their procedure and the things that they had done, which have come down through the ages, a lot of it.
Well, where do you live now? Tell our listeners a little bit about Vance.
I lived at River Road in Blankenbaker area until 1997. And we had the high water down there, and I had to find a place to live. So I live in Clarksville, Indiana, and I think that my old house got hit again this year down there by River Road in Blankenbaker. I loved it. It's like living in the country, but I had to swim out of there in 97. Then I retired in 99.
When you go around town to this day and you speak, do people hear your voice and go, whoa, I know that voice?
Yeah, it's pretty amazing that people who don't even know me, when they see me, sometimes will say, hey, I know who you are, or I know that voice. But when you retire, a lot of funny things happen. You meet. I met one young lady a few years ago, and she said, she looked at me and pointed. We're in a group of people at a party or something one night. Said, she pointed at me, said, "You used to be somebody, didn't you?" Or they'll say, "Whatever happened to you?" And about 2 years ago, I went in a convenient mart and I bought newspaper and a gallon of milk, and I'm getting ready to go back home. And as the lady on the cash register has a handful of change, and I put my hand out. As she drops the change in the palm of my hand, she looks me straight in the eye and says, "Thank you, Mr. Perky."
Wayne will love that story.
Yeah. So they get you confused, but I tell Terry Miners, nobody's ever mistaken me for you.
You really had a great bond with Milton Metz. We all sort of miss Milton. Yeah. You have some favorite memories of him?
You better believe it. Milton was quite a unique, and he influenced me a lot when I came here. His intellectualism and his appreciation of the finer things. He's well read. He spoke well, had a good vocabulary. He loved tennis, and I got into tennis a lot because of Milton, and that's a great sport for people after they get out of college or intramural sports.
Did you play with Walter Cronkite too?
No, I never played with Walton, but I played a lot with Milton, Joe Creason, and even Barry Bingham, Jr. and Sr. But Milton was a unique individual and taught me a lot about how to improve yourself and about broadcasting. And we were very close and did a lot of things together down through the years. I worked with him from 57 to 99, so I knew the guy pretty well in a lot of ways. And I told a story on the crusade. We both had sons about the same age. His son was Perry, and he kept saying, "Well, I'd like to go fishing. Take us fishing sometime." And I said, "Okay, Milton, next Friday." So I took my son, and he brought Perry, and we went out to somewhere like Floyd's Fork to fish. So I said, it's kind of like I was babysitting, because I got outfits and put a cork on them where they wouldn't be casting a lot and messing up, hanging up in trees and things. So I bought some red worms. Of course, I fly fish now, and I don't do much of that type fishing, but sometimes maybe so. So I get out there, and I bait the worms up and get ready to throw the three little outfits out for them. As I'm baiting the worm on the hook, Milton takes his cigar out of his mouth, and he says, "Hey, Booby, do you think that worm feels any pain when you impale it on that hook?"
Only Milton would ask that
question.
And
I thought, that's Milton's intellectuality about fishing.
Do you look back in your career and smile and say, "Hey, I had a pretty good one"?
Oh, yeah, I had the best job in Louisville. Didn't make the most money down through the years, but Clear Channel came along and bought WHAS radio, and that stock didn't do too bad for a long time. So I got my comeuppance on all that. But I feel like I had the most interesting career of anybody in Louisville. I traveled so much. I tell people I went around the world twice, spoke to everybody once. I did basketball, football. I went to Tokyo twice, went to Hawaii 4 times, went to Alaska 3. I've been there back on vacations and things. Broadcast games everywhere you can imagine. Met top people, covered 40 Kentucky Derbies. What else would you want to do? And was free. Nobody ever tell me what I had to say from the editorial standpoint. I was not in the pocket of any team, any athletic director, any coach. I was independent. And I reached a point in my career where I called my own shots, just about. That's a pretty nice place to be.
It is. Are you happy in your life? Everything good and content?
Very happy. Life couldn't have been happier for me.
Right now? Everything okay?
Yes, very much so. I've been lucky enough to have real good health. 17 years ago, I had a 10-hour surgery at Johns Hopkins for pancreatic cancer. Pretty lucky. I'm still here and healthy as I can be.
And you look the same. I might add, everybody remembers Van, the way he looks. Looking at me, he looks the same. As I like to do with my podcast guests, I send them a questions, about 6 questions ahead of time, sort of to wrap our podcast up. And so I want to hit Van with my 6 questions that I sent him just a few weeks ago. Your favorite moment of your broadcast career, radio or TV, Van?
Well, it has to be, and I can't select either one of these because they're co-equal the 75 championship with the Colonels, and then the 86 championship when the Cardinals beat Duke at a reunion for the NCAA. And then who could ever forget the Dream Game in 83 when the whole state of Kentucky
shut down
is in Knoxville, Tennessee. Kaywood and Ralph are there. Jack Tennant and I are there with the UK broadcast, with the U of L broadcast. I look down, John Y. Brown, Phyllis George, ex-governors are there. All the Kentucky fans, the Louisville fans, red and blue in an orange Stokely, big orange arena, red and blue with a orange background. That's my greatest moment in broadcasting.
The one line of advice you would give future broadcasters and journalists?
Well, I can give a lot. First, get well educated, study the history of the business, study the objective newscasters and news people or journalistic people of the past. Try to study the history of it in your state and nationally. People like Edward R. Murrow, Walter Cronkite,
David Brinkley.
And others who have come along down through the years. There have been good journalists of one kind or another. Learn how to write. That's important, to write a lot. Even though you might be in broadcast journalism, writing teaches you more language, words, word usage, verbiage, and that helps you in your talking situation. And most of all, be objective. Now, of course, so much has happened now because of social media, the cell phones and all of that. We can go online and go and learn so much. The whole world is at your fingertips. Come up with the idea that the world doesn't necessarily want to know your opinion of everything. They want you to report on it. And
objectivity is still important in your mind.
Yes. Objectivity is, to me, very, very important. We had two men from Kentucky. When I went into the Kentucky Journalism Hall of Fame, I didn't realize this. Julian Goodman and Arthur Kroc. I was the third man from Barron County. Those two men were from Barron County. Julian Goodman, who once was head of the whole NBC, was from Glasgow, my home county. I did not realize that Arthur Kroc, the premier journalist of the 20th century, especially the first half, won 3 Pulitzer Prizes. He was from Glasgow, Kentucky.
I didn't know that
Covered the Versailles Peace Treaty when Woodrow Wilson in World War I was given a special award by the French. Study men like that. In journalism. We had a real good journalist that worked at this station, worked at the Courier Journal in his own field, Byron Crawford. Great journalist.
And he's still around.
It sure is. But that's the important thing in journalism, I think, is to, and I'd like for people to go back. Maybe they emphasized enunciation and pronunciation too much when I came along, but I'd like to see more of the news people and the journalists work on their enunciation and pronunciation a little more. Maybe my age and my ears. I'm not understanding people as much.
I love your advice. I'm hanging on every word, and in fact, I'm going to take some of it.
All right.
Your favorite local neighborhood or street, one that strikes your eye or curiosity for its beauty of architectural examples when you come across it.
Okay, you know where the Filson Club is?
In Old Louisville
on 4th Street. That's a great area to walk along and study the architecture and just walk and ogle that and take it in. Fantastic. That would be an area that I need to explore more that I haven't. I told you I used to walk Cox's Park back and forth. I like that. There are times that I would not walk Cox's Park at night, maybe, but a place that really, and then I used to walk at night because it's safe, was by the old water company where you could walk around
the reservoir.
Yeah, that. But about 6-7 years ago, maybe less, I went out and did a cancer walk. We raised a lot of money, broke records, and driving out Southern Parkway to Iroquois Park, there's an area out there of old trees, beautiful road, separation over to the sidewalk. People were riding bikes in the morning. They were walking. And I said, this is the way cities should be built in this day and age. I got to go back out there and visit that. That place was fantastic. Have you ever been out there?
Yes. That's the way they did it back then.
I know. We need to do that some more, Doug.
It's beautiful. your favorite area to walk, hike, or bike in this area?
Well, as I said, I did walk Cox's Park, and I rode bikes some out there in Riviera in the area where I lived. But I think I pretty well covered most of that.
The one line of advice you would give future broadcasters and journalists, that might be sort of what I asked early on, but I was wondering if there was one final bit of advice you might have.
Be as independent as you can. And like I said, you've got to make up your mind in this day and age. Are you going to be an opinion broadcaster, or are you going to be an objective anchor, reporter, or reporter? And to me, that's pretty important. And if you're going to be an opinion broadcaster, be well read on your subject.
Know your stuff.
Yep.
My final question, the future of Louisville is?
Well, here's the thing about Louisville. In my recalling history, Lawrence Weatherby, I think, contributed as much to Kentucky and Louisville as anybody's ever come along.
The former governor from Middletown.
He is the man who built the fairgrounds, Freedom Hall, Coliseum, built the turnpike from Louisville to E-Town. You had to pay to travel it. But he brought us into an era. We were way behind in a lot of ways up to that. And then I have to give Cowgill and Cook a lot of credit. When they took over as mayor and county
Mayor Cowger?
Cowgill, Fred Cowgill, or no, Fred Cowger.
No,
Cowger.
Cowger was the mayor. Cowger.
He was an insurance man. Cowger and Cook. Yeah. He and Marlowe Cook took over the reins of the county, and they brought in, during their time, GE, and they have to get a lot of credit for that. I have to say I'm a little bit behind times on knowing to give any individual administration credit for UPS, but those are three major developments.
That'd be Jerry Abramson.
Okay, let's
UPS.
give Jerry the credit. He was a great mayor.
So you believe the future is bright for Louisville?
Yes, I do, because of our location, and we need more people like Cowger, Cook, and Jerry, who served a long time. I'm a little bit critical of Jerry, although I like him personally, that he and McConnell and the others didn't get something done on the bridges much sooner. I got to be critical of him on that. But we need people who go in and get it done.
And now we've got two brand spanking new bridges.
That's right. And I say Louisville, everything's going to go sky high. I cannot believe the way it's grown in some areas where I drive, and I haven't been in a long time. And I said, man, this place is on the move.
I know. I'll look over to my wife sometimes and say, is this the town we grew up in? It's crazy.
That's right.
Well, Van, thanks for coming in.
My Proffitt, Doug.
All right. Don't forget, I'd like to hear your feedback. My email address is one word. It's dproffitt, DPROFFITT at WHAS11.com. Send us your feedback. And if you like this podcast with Van Vance, send me a note about Van. I'll forward it to him. Thanks for listening. This has been a production of WHAS 11 Media.